In this presentation, we'll discuss growing pawpaw in Alabama. We'll discuss pawpaw ecology and range in Alabama, how to prepare your orchard for pawpaw planting, which cultivars will be most productive here, how to propagate them, and considerations related to pollination, orchard management, pest and disease, harvest, and fruit use and sales. The common pawpaw, Asimina triloba, is the largest edible native tree fruit in the eastern U.S. Its native range runs from South Georgia and South Alabama up through southern New York State and over through Iowa and into eastern Nebraska, eastern Oklahoma, so encompassing much of that eastern U.S. region. It's a naturally occurring understory tree, so you typically find it in a forest setting, though for best fruit production in an orchard ultimately needs full sunlight. The fruit contains all the essential amino acids. It's also the host for the zebra swallowtail butterfly, so a lot of people like it as an ornamental. In much of Alabama, you're most likely to find common pawpaw on a stream bank where it has access to plenty of water and it's partially shaded. So it is a naturally occurring forest understory tree. In the picture there, all the vegetation is pawpaw. Much of that is probably root suckers. There may be only a few actual mother trees there, and the rest of that is all occurring from those central root systems. In a wild patch like that, often there's very little to no fruit set because it's not getting enough light. Pawpaw leaves contain Ananaceous acetogenins, which are compounds the plant has evolved to deter herbaceous predation by insects and deer and other herbivores. Some butterflies, though, their caterpillars have evolved to be able to tolerate those chemicals, such as the zebra swallowtail butterfly. Pawpaw is pollinated by flies and beetles, and it is resistant to deer browse. In North Alabama, the common pawpaw, which we showed on the previous slides, is the more likely to be found. In South Alabama, you're more likely to come across small flower pawpaw, Asimina parviflora. Both these species, though, do occur in most of Alabama, with common pawpaw more likely being on a stream bank or in a wet bottom area, and small flower pawpaw being on upland sites or in the coastal plain and drier, sandier soils. This is a dwarf pawpaw. Usually you'll see it about 3 or 4 feet high. It does produce a very small edible fruit that's not grown commercially. It's not large enough to be warranted as a crop, but there are potential applications in breeding with Asimina parviflora, especially for the southern end of Alabama. Also, the two species will cross naturally, and that's referred to as Asimina piedmontana. Although you can grow common pawpaw in South Alabama, you'll have the most success commercially growing it in the northern 2/3 of Alabama. One reason for that is the chill hour requirement. So most of our high-yielding pawpaw cultivars require 600 to 700 chill hours for maximum fruit set. Although you could have it in Dothan or Mobile, your fruit set will be less than ideal in terms of the number of flowers actually setting fruit successfully because you may not be receiving enough chill hours and you're beyond the southern end of the native range of that fruit. Although pawpaw, of course, fruits naturally, to grow commercially as an orchard, there's quite a bit of preparation that needs to go into that. First, you should soil test and adjust the pH to between 5.5 and 6.5, liming if needed to raise the pH. You'll want to space out your orchard and map that out. Typically, pawpaw will go 10 to 12 feet in row spacing, so between trees in the row, and your rows might be 15 to 20 feet apart depending on your equipment, your mowing equipment, and how you need to lay that out. So that usually amounts to between 250 and 300 trees per acre. Pawpaws will respond to additions of organic matter if you can incorporate compost or cover crops in the year prior to planting the orchard. You'll definitely want to install irrigation in Alabama. Pawpaw needs consistent moisture and irrigation to get its best fruit yields. Also in Alabama, you should plan to be able to cover the trees with shade cloth the first year, whether that's tomato cages with 50% shade cloth over it or shading the entire row. Pawpaw will experience quite a bit of mortality in the first year if it's planted directly into full sun, and you can plant it either in the fall or the spring. Research is still emerging on how much fertility pawpaw needs for optimum fruit set. These are some recommendations per University of Missouri. You should soil test and adjust your phosphorus and potassium based on that soil test to 90 and 250 pounds per acre respectively, and then you'll usually get a crop response from nitrogen around 100 pounds per acre annually. We recommend applying that fertilizer into 3 applications each growing season after growth begins. So if you see growth beginning late March, you can apply 1/3 of your fertilizer then. 6 weeks later, maybe in early May, your second application, and your last application in late June. You don't want to fertilize after midsummer because that will encourage the plant not to shut down in the fall, and it will be more susceptible to freeze damage. Pawpaw is susceptible to nutrient deficiencies, not only the NPK that we mentioned in terms of fertilizers on the previous slide, but especially magnesium. Magnesium deficiency is pictured here. This can occur when the pH is too high. If you're above 6.5, that's going to limit the ability of the tree to take up micronutrients and magnesium. And you can get the type of discoloration shown here where the veins of the leaves are still dark green, but there's yellowing in between those main veins. So your best defense against this is having the correct pH range or applying magnesium if needed, such as through Epsom salts. Wild pawpaw have quite a bit of variation in their fruit quality, with some wild pawpaw having much better eating quality and yield than other wild pawpaw. We have cultivars now that have come out in the past 20 or so years that are high yielding and have much better eating quality. Alabama A&M installed a research orchard in 2000 looking at the cultivars that were available at the time. Those were all standard cultivars such as 421 and Sunflower, which are 2 that we do recommend for Alabama. After the time that orchard was installed, though, there's been quite a bit of breeding work on pawpaw, and your commercial standards today are the Peterson pawpaw cultivars such as Susquehanna and Shenandoah, and the KSU cultivars such as KSU Atwood, KSU Benson, and KSU Chappelle. Most cultivars come from genetics that were originally selected in the Midwest. We do have some southern genetics though, such as the cultivar Mango, which came from Georgia. But all the cultivars listed up here, including the KSU and Peterson pawpaw cultivars, fall in that 600 to 700 chill hour range, so you can and should successfully grow them in Alabama. Of those A&M cultivars, the ones we would still recommend are Sunflower and 421. Pawpaw cultivars are always grafted onto seedling rootstock. That means seed is collected out of fruit, whether that's fruit that came from an orchard that had cultivars or wild type fruit. That fruit has to go through a cold stratification period. Pawpaw seed is recalcitrant, so it cannot dry out, or germination drops to about 5%. So when you collect pawpaw seed out of fruit to germinate it as a rootstock, it's important that it remains moist. You can store it in the refrigerator in slightly moist sand and needs a 3 to 4 month stratification period. If you collect it in September, you can hold it to March, no problem, and then germinate it outside. My recommendation is to germinate wild type rootstock with Alabama genetics and then graft on cultivars that have high yields and good eating quality. You can graft either through whip and tongue grafting, chip budding, or when the trees are around 2-inch diameter, you can use a bark inlay graft where you go into your orchard and you cut off trees that are already at a 2-inch diameter, and then you insert cultivars after the fact. Pawpaw flowers all have both male and female botanical parts, so they both produce pollen and have ovaries, but the time in which they do that is separated. So each flower starts out being receptive to pollen, and then it actually produces it. So these flowers do not self-pollinate. In the picture in the right there, the one that has more of a yellow hue to it, right in the middle, there's 4 stigma. So that flower has the potential to produce up to 4 fruits in a cluster. It's pollinated by the flower that's in that pollen stage where it looks like more rough yellow speckles on a brown background. That's the male stage when it's actually producing pollen. So self-fertilization is possible in pawpaw, but usually no more than 5 to 10%. So you definitely want multiple cultivars to get fruit. Pawpaw is largely self-pruned, so often little pruning is needed, but they can sometimes have a tendency to grow into multiple trunks. You want to keep them with one strong central leader, remove dead and diseased wood, remove any root suckers, and usually top them off about 15 feet or wherever is feasible for you to harvest the fruit where they're not too high. Pawpaw production will suffer when there's competition from grasses and other weeds within the row. It will benefit you economically to control the weeds. You can do that through landscape fabric, mulching with wood chips, or using herbicides. There's a limited number of herbicides that are labeled for pawpaw. Some glyphosate products are, though. You want to be sure when you're using a systemic herbicide like that, if you choose to do so, that you remove the root suckers, because with a systemic, that could take up the chemical and actually bring it to the mother plant and harm it. So you need to go through, remove all the root suckers before a systemic herbicide application. In between the rows, a living cover of clover or grasses should be established. Pawpaws have this strong tendency to root sucker. So wherever that root system goes from the mother plant, they have a tendency to send up suckers. If herbicide had been sprayed on that sucker there, that would damage the mother plant. Pawpaw is the host plant to the zebra swallowtail butterfly, meaning the caterpillar of the zebra swallowtail only feeds on Asimina species. So in Alabama, common pawpaw or small flower pawpaw. Lots of people like seeing this butterfly, and they plant pawpaw as a host plant. In an orchard setting, though, zebra swallowtail caterpillars can defoliate young pawpaw plants to the point that it would cause economic harm. Often in a mature orchard, a grower would relocate those caterpillars from a young tree to a more mature tree because they do need to be controlled for the first few years after planting the pawpaw. Once a pawpaw tree is mature, it can typically handle feeding from zebra swallowtail caterpillars with no real issue. Another insect pest of pawpaw is the Asimina webworm moth, also called the pawpaw webworm moth. You can see this in orchards or in natural locations, especially when there's many stems available. This is a moth that creates a webbing around the leaves and curls up inside of it, and that can lead to significant leaf loss. The pawpaw peduncle borer is another moth whose caterpillar will chew into the flowers of pawpaw, causing them to drop. When levels are manageable, often this ends up being a beneficial thinning. Pawpaw typically flowers in April in Alabama, and the pawpaw peduncle borer will lay eggs that hatch into caterpillars that will chew through some of the flowers, causing them to drop, but in a way that doesn't impact overall yields. It is possible, though, that sometimes levels are high enough that this becomes a real economic pest and more flowers drop than a grower would want. Ambrosia beetle is another serious pest of pawpaw. This beetle bores into trunks, typically that are less than 3 inches diameter. It causes 1/16 inch diameter holes, and you'll typically be able to notice toothpick-like frass coming out of the trunk. That's a sign that you have ambrosia beetle. Typically at that point, it's really too late to control them, and this can cause serious tree mortality. The most serious disease of pawpaw is Phylosticta, which is a fungal leaf spot disease. Sometimes it's at levels that doesn't cause much harm. It starts out as brown spots on the leaves surrounded by a yellow halo. Those eventually become necrotic and they turn a light brown with a dark black ring around them. If it stays on the leaves at a manageable level, it's nothing to worry about. In a severe case, though, which often would happen when the trees are stressed, such as the fruit on the left there, it deeply blackens the fruit to the point that it will actually crack open, and at that point the fruit is unmarketable. After planting an orchard, it typically takes 5 years until a grower gets their first real commercial harvest off of grafted trees. Pawpaw season in Alabama runs from late July to late September, depending on the cultivar. Sunflower is one of our earlier cultivars. Pawpaw is ripe when it is either on the ground or it's beginning to soften on the tree, where growers should pick it off the tree when it comes off with absolutely no effort. It's important to harvest pawpaw when it's fully ripe because it often causes stomach issues for people who eat it when it's not fully ripe. It has a poor shelf life. The skin is fairly delicate, so you should consume it in the refrigerator where it can last for several weeks. Many growers will choose to pulp it, discard the seeds and the skin, and freeze it as frozen pulp. Growing pawpaw for fruit is an emerging industry. There's price ranges all over the place per pound, ranging from 2 to 15. Most growers have 5 or less acres, and they're direct marketing their fruit in a variety of creative ways, whether that's fresh fruit, turning it into ice cream, or selling it to others who turn it into ice cream, yogurts, beverages, jam, baked goods, things like that. There's also a significant market for the grafted trees themselves. Often nurseries that produce grafted pawpaw with named cultivars sell out, and those trees can run from $25 to $55 per grafted tree of improved pawpaw cultivar. For more information, see the Alabama Extension Pawpaw Production Guide. We also recommend the guides by University of Missouri and the extensive resources provided by Kentucky State University.